Okay, well, welcome. Tonight we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at faces, and particularly the spiritual aspects of faces. And just so you know, if you're wondering why a lot of the slides have the images tilted to the left, as if I've tipped the slideshow on its side, it's because I find that with a lot of Zoom sessions, people complain that they can't see the whole slide because people's faces are in the way that are on Zoom. And so to solve that problem, I've tried to put as many of the important images on the left as I can. So that's the reason for that. It's quite deliberate. Okay, so I'm Joe. I'm from the Swedenborg Centre, and without further ado, I'll get stuck into this. So the face represents spiritual and celestial things existing interiorly with a person, says Swedenborg. So the face is a very important part of us, obviously, if it expresses that which is inside of us. And I often wonder why we have practices of hiding our face. Some experts have mused about the tradition of having a veiled bride arrive at the wedding, and they say that, for example, it traces its roots back to Rome, where the bride walked down the aisle with a veil over her face to disguise herself from any evil spirits who wanted to thwart her happiness. Now, you know, you can expect that from experts, especially experts in non-spiritual matters. My speculation is that it represents a correspondence. So if we conduct ourselves in a heavenly manner and become celestial angels, we collectively become the bride of God. So what's the bride of God? When we live according to God's truth, which is the Word or the Lord as its representative, then we become a means by which God's love as good can manifest itself, which is what God treasures above all else. Veils can be a visual barrier, a subtle one like a bridal veil, or more opaque like the curtain of a temple, as the one that was torn in two when Christ died on the cross. Veils keep things hidden from view or understanding. It might keep God from us, or aspects of God from us, which we may or may not ever get to know. It might hide our inner self from our outer self, or it might hide our intentions from others. Veils can also be a symbol of ignorance or unconsciousness, or to protect things of value is another reason. Here's a particularly beautiful sculpture of a veiled face. This is called the Veiled Virgin. It's a beautifully expressive piece of sculpture. Now, veils are not just for women. Men also wear veils in various parts of the world, as in this one called the Sarabandi, which is a traditional Indian veil for men. So, hiding one's true feelings and thoughts is referred to by Swedenborg as dissimulation. And he indicates that this has been happening with us since the most ancient church. And he distinguishes the most ancient church in its behaviour and spiritual state, in that they weren't so much concerned about trying to hide their inner feelings. It wasn't their thing. In fact, they treasured being honest, open, innocent and true. And so we have a long way to go back to that for ourselves. We have a long journey to travel, to return to that pristine spiritual state within ourselves. And that's our challenge of today. Now, some people don't like their face much, or they want to change their face in some other way, as is the case with Nicole Kidman. You can hide yourself through plastic surgery, or in the case of Olivia Newton-John, or in the case of Christina Ricci, I don't know if it's good genes or good surgeons. I suppose these days you can make your choice. Now she is the girl that plays all the bad characters, as she started some tradition of being cast in that role with the Addams Family when she was part of that. So I find that natural is best. For me, it really expresses who the person is, and there's nothing to hide really. Everything that's natural is in some way beautiful. And the eyes are considered the windows of the soul. So you've got to ask yourself, if that's the case, then why do we put a mask over our face at any time? And we're just going to explore that briefly. One reason is that we want to hide our identity, as in the case here of Lindy Chamberlain, when she was accused, apparently incorrectly, for, saying they claimed that she killed her baby. That would have been a very big emotional event in her life, and of course she wouldn't want to show her deep feelings that are going on at that time. So sunglasses is a good way to hide that. As you might find in a poker tournament, poker face means a face that doesn't show any of your thoughts, and poker players at a high level are very skilled at detecting what a person might be thinking based on their emotions, their movements, their twitches, anything that gives away. Some people can hide from shame, some people can hide in order to surprise. Some people hide their identity so that they can get away with actions that normally aren't condoned, as in the Venetian masked balls. You might want to mask yourself in order not to be detected. It's not so common these days. It's more internet fraud and online financial frauds that we're dealing with, not so much people pulling a stash out of a bank or a home. Of course, we also wear masks in order to protect ourselves for health and safety. By the way, the COVID pandemic has hampered the way that people perceive faces. There's been some psychological studies that have shown there's a change in the way people are perceiving faces because of it. Another type of mask to wear for the sake of a good night's sleep for those who've got problems. You might wear a mask for your safety. You might wear a mask for the sake of becoming beautiful, or for the sake of appearing beautiful. What does it hide? Does it maybe hide low self-esteem? I don't know. It differs for different people. It can be to play a symbolic role, like a certain character on the stage or film. As we've seen, the history of clowning has actually changed quite a lot recently. Clowns have become seen as much more sinister characters rather than jovial, silly characters. The court jester has certainly taken a long winding path to today's representations. And there's a lot of movies, of course, that have featured masks, which have been very interesting. A mask can be worn to enter into a more realistic sense of an animal, for example, or an animalistic state, to get more in touch with certain natural forces. Or, for example, to get in touch with the dead, the souls, spirits, or God even. But as they do in the Day of the Dead, the Dia de Muertos, did I say that right? Which is a Mexican holiday at All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day, which is November the 1st and the 2nd, when they remember and pray for the souls of the dead. In Tibet, they also carry out these masked traditions to represent that which is spiritually going on. It's sort of highlighting, if you like, or exaggerating certain dynamics of spiritual forces that are acting in people's lives or on people's lives. And it's a sort of drama played out with these fantastic and sometimes frightening masks to show what's really going on behind the scenes in our own minds and hearts. There are veils for the sake of modesty. So for religious reasons, for example, as in the case of the Islamic religion, which has all variants of different kinds of facial modesty dress. Now, I found an interesting reference here in a couple of years ago, no, actually earlier this year. It was in Switzerland. They banned the burqa in public spaces because they wanted people to be identifiable and their expressions to be identifiable. And I find it rather amusing that the person who was announcing this ban was wearing a mask because of the COVID pandemic. It's a sort of ironic statement. And masks can also help us to remember certain people and detailed features of people, as in the death mask of the famous Beethoven composer. Now, there is a case of death masks being used for creating sculptures of famous people, as in the case of this guy, who is a Russian author called Nikolai Gogol. And I don't know if you can see it, but don't worry about the bird poop on the on the sculpture, but he's got a rather sort of wide nose. And it was known that Gogol, to those who knew Gogol, knew that he had a very narrow nose, actually. So they wondered why it was that this sculpture had such a wide nose. And they've eventually discovered the reason was that the death mask that was taken of Gogol had developed a little air bubble above the nose, and the sculptor, who didn't know what Gogol looked like, faithfully tried to reproduce what he thought was part of the nose and sort of smoothed it out a little bit, creating this big lumpy nose instead of the fine, sharp nose that Gogol actually had. So the face expresses feelings and expresses pure essence if it's not dissimulated. So if we don't act through our face to either present something or hide something, or present something that's created deliberately for an effect or for an appearance, then the face expresses pure feeling and instinct. And this is the natural state. So if we look at facial expressions like smiles, there are studies that have been done on different kinds of smiles, and they've come up with 10 different kinds of smiles. The first one's called a reward smile. So this arises from a positive feeling, contentment or approval or happiness of some kind, and it's used to motivate ourselves or others. And there's lots of sensory stimuli because it activates the muscles in the mouth, the cheeks, eyebrow, and it creates positive input from the senses, and they increase the good feelings and they reinforce the behaviour. So the expression and the feeling go together. Sometimes psychologists will advise a person to put on a certain facial expression or bodily expression in order to feel different. And at other times, the bodily or facial expression or feeling of the feeling of a person will come out through their expression. So it can work both ways. So it creates a feel-good chemical called dopamine. Or there's the affiliative smile, which reassures others. It's a sort of symbol of politeness. You know, you're communicating trustworthiness, a sense of belonging, good intentions, to make sure that I'm not misread or misunderstood. It's used as a social connector. It's like a gentle smile. There's a bit of compassion. There's an upward pull of the lips, often triggering dimpling in the cheeks. And it may include a lip presser, so the lips are closed quite tightly. There's a dominant smile, showing of superiority, contempt, or derision even, to make others feel less powerful. It's a kind of a sneer. It's often asymmetrical, so one side will be different to the other. The lip will curl, the eyebrows are raised to expose more eye white, which is often accompanies signals of disgust or anger. Another kind of smile is the lying smile, where the face isn't the lie detector. Even experienced law enforcement officials can only spot liars half of the time. Not that accurate, actually. So there's a major muscle called the Zigatomaticus, which comes into play here. It pulls the lips into a smile, and it's repeatedly fired. But that's not the case if a person's genuinely grief-stricken, for example. So this is a manufactured smile that's retained in quite a tight little consistent way. There's a wistful smile, smiling in the midst of both emotional or physical pain. It's used to reassure others or to relieve oneself, to provide relief. You all know this smile, the polite smile, on first meeting a person or on delivering bad news, concealing an unfavourable response, something like that. It also uses that big muscle, the Zigatomaticus, which is mainly used for mouth smiles. It's where the eyes don't quite match the mouth, right? So there's no, the muscles of the eye don't activate here. There's no eye smile. It maintains a certain distance between people. So genuine feelings would draw us closer, but this doesn't. So when we need trustworthy friendliness but not emotional intimacy, that's when this smile comes into play. It's a polite smile versus a heartfelt smile. And this is what's considered the flirtatious smile. So it's used on going on dates, for example. And there's even dating websites and psychology websites and even dental websites who advise you how to smile in order to flirt. So you keep the lips together, lift an eyebrow, tip the head slightly, have a little whipped cream or coffee froth on your lips, and that sort of thing. Smiling makes you more attractive. Attractiveness is heavily influenced by smiling, and happy, intense smiles can compensate for relative unattractiveness, so they say on these sites anyway. Not that I visit many of them. This is called the embarrassed smile. So there's a downward tilt of the head, shifting gaze to the left. If embarrassed, you'll probably touch your face a bit more. And these smiles tend not to last as long as amused or polite smiles. So they're very temporary. Then there's called the Pan Am smile. You all know this one. The Pan Am flight attendants were required to keep smiling even when customers or circumstances made them annoyed. Forced or fake smiles, they appear very extreme. So when people are posing, they use extra effort to yank their Zigatomaticus muscle and lifting the corners of their mouth extra high, exposing more teeth. If it's asymmetrical, then the left mouth side will be higher than the right side. Relentlessly using this Pan Am smile could affect your health. People who have to fake happiness regularly at work often end up drinking off the stress after they clock out. So be careful with that smile. Finally, there's the most genuine smile of all, called the Duchenne Smile. And it's named after Julien Duchenne, who's a 19th century scientist who mapped the human body and all the muscles, including facial control. This is called the gold standard of smiles. It's a smile of genuine enjoyment. It simultaneously involves the mouth and the cheeks and the eyes. Nothing's left out. A whole smile seems to light up suddenly. Authentic Duchenne smiles make you seem trustworthy, authentic and friendly, and it generate better customer service experience and better tips, apparently. I've never experienced that part of it, but anyway. Linked to longer life and healthier relationships. So people with these kind of smiles in their high school photos were more likely to become happily married much later. And baseball players whose photos showed intense, authentic smiles lived much longer than those whose smiles look less intense. So there's been lots of studies done on what people use, what kind of smiles, and how long do they live. Lots of longevity studies. So let's relate a Swedenborg quote to this. The human the human face shows what correspondences are like. So correspondences are the relationships between natural and spiritual things. In a face that has not been taught to dissimulate, all affections manifest visibly in a natural form. The mind manifests in the face as though an imprint. Hence the face is the index of the mind. It is our spiritual world within our natural world. Also, elements of our understanding manifest in our speech, and our volition manifests in our behaviour. So correspondences are things that occur in the body, whether in our faces, our speech, or our behaviour. So there was a fellow called Ataturk who brought a lot of the disparate regions of Turkey together in the 1920s. And he said, this is one of his famous quotes, "To see me doesn't necessarily mean to see my face. To understand my thoughts is to have seen me." So the thoughts in his mind spoke of who he was. Now, it's quite difficult to get into people's thoughts, but you possibly all know this piece of art. This is called The Scream by the Norwegian expressionist Edvard Munch. It's from 1893, and originally the German title by Munch himself was Der Schrei der Natur, which means the scream of nature, which in the Norwegian is skrik, or shriek. It's become an icon ever since, symbolising the anxiety over the human condition, or anxiety in general, at least. Munch said that at the time he was on a walk at sunset, when suddenly he saw the setting sun's light turning the clouds a blood red, and he sensed an infinite scream passing through nature. He may have been a bit preoccupied by his sister's commitment at a nearby lunatic asylum not long before that. It's one of the most frequently stolen paintings in modern history, auctioned in London in 2012 to the Norwegian businessman Peter Olsen for $120 million, which is about 160 Australian dollars million. Not bad for a painting that depicts something of that kind. Here's another famous painting. What kind of smile do you think this is? So since polite smile? Polite smile, very polite, I think. Apparently it was very unknown until fairly recently as a painting. It hasn't always been famous. It was actually pretty obscure until I think it was until a robbery occurred and it was returned. Anyway, since I've been involved in technology for many decades, I'm always interested in artificial intelligence and computers and what they can do with us and for us. And there's somebody who tried to use artificial intelligence to generate the real face from a painting, so how the person would have looked in real life. So this is apparently what they think, you know, the real face of Mona Lisa may have been. And they did the same with Rembrandt from one of his paintings. So this is a computer-generated face, not a real person's face. They did something similar with Benjamin Franklin. And there's another type of artificial intelligence use of face manipulations, which tries to take people's faces like Benjamin Franklin's and predicts what they would look like if you met them in the street today. So this is apparently what Benjamin Franklin would look like if you ran into him in the street in Sydney. So I thought, well, why not do this with Swedenborg and see what he might have looked like if I'd met him in the street.
Brilliant.
You wouldn't recognise him, would you? Yeah. Anyhow, so who is the real person then? Would the real Swedenborg please stand up? We know that there's many portraits of Swedenborg, and it's very difficult to actually assess from those portraits which one actually represents the true Swedenborg. It's not just a matter of what did he look like, it's also a matter of what's the skill and perception of the person who is doing the portraiture. So let's have a quick look at all the 25 portraits that we know are around of Swedenborg. That's quite a few Swedenborgs. In my opinion, that's not just one person, eh? Anyway. So
there's not a whole lot of smiling going on in those photos. He's not giving us that.
Well, you got to remember though, Todd, that nowadays you can take a snapshot in a split second and you can capture someone's smile. But in those days, you had to sit for hours and hours and hours in order to be painted like that. So your smile muscles would be rather tiresome at the end of all that.
No excuses, Joe.
But speaking of,
it seems obvious, Joe, that he thinks his right side is his best side.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, I did manipulate some of them a little bit to line them all up so that it wouldn't look too odd, jumping around the screen. Okay, so speaking of smiles, they have, through the years, increased. If you look at the pictures of the 1900s, top left is the men on the left side and the women on the right side. Top left, college, what do you call them? Yearbooks. And if you go through the different ages by a decade at a time, going from left to right and then from top to bottom. This is research has been done by University of California, Berkeley. You see that the smile gradually increases over the decades, which is quite interesting.
Joe, that proves Russell Kirk's point when he said, man of today would find life of 100 years ago unbearable suffering.
Ah, yeah. Well, this is true, actually. I suppose life has gotten better, hasn't it, in modern day? We don't have to do all the hard yakka.
At least we want people to 100 years from now to think so.
Indeed. What have we lost in the meantime? That's my question. And here's the statistics of how much smiles have increased over the decades. So there is actually real evidence that it has improved. I don't know if you know Angels of Our Better Nature. I think, Todd, you've mentioned that before, or somebody has.
No, I definitely have. Yep.
By Steve Pinker. It's actually a good read. He says, why do we think and imagine that things have gotten worse when actually all the statistics tell us that things are getting better? And maybe the smiles just prove that point. So here we've got in the smiles per decade from 1930 to 2000. These were taken in the 1930s. These were taken in the year 2000. And on the left, in the left column, by the way, you've got a sort of composite, which is an averaging of those faces in the row on the right. So you've got the individual faces on the right, but on the left, you've got a kind of summary face that shows the general smile trend. And here you've got three different periods during that time, 1930, 2000. So 1930 on the left, somewhere halfway through, I can't remember what that date was, I didn't write it down, but it's somewhere halfway through, and then you've got 2000 on the right, which is pretty recent. So the person who did a lot of playing around with composites, where he merged a whole lot of people's faces into what are the common features or the most striking and similar features of these different faces, was a guy called Sir Francis Galton. And Francis Galton was a cousin of Charles Darwin, and in the 1800s he's one of the most famous mathematicians and experimenters of his day. He used photographic plates and then exposed those plates onto a single one, and then so he ended up with a sort of multiple exposure, if you like. It was the first multiple exposure really that we know about. These days we can do all that with computers as well. So where you've got a whole lot of pictures at the top, you can merge and combine two of them and represent the common features in the row below, and then combine those again in the row below that. You end up with the picture right at the bottom as a sort of representative sample of all of those faces. You too can try stuff like this on various websites, face research website, where you can play around with faces and even make yourself look younger and older, and what would I look like if. It's loads of fun. So it's www.faceresearch.org if you want to try that out. So here we've got psychologists in Glasgow University in Scotland combining faces of people around the world to approximate what is the average face of each country. And they were using a modern version of Galton's technique. Multiple images of faces were aligned and composited together to form the final result. So these faces all look pretty different. But the peculiar thing is that when they take all the faces, the individual faces on the left there, they average out to the faces on the right. This is an example taken from faces snapped in Sydney. So they're the average faces. And I think they look quite beautiful. So Swedenborg in Heaven and Hell says, our human form is lovelier after death to the extent that we have more deeply loved higher truths and lived by them. The deeper the affection and the more it accords with heaven, the lovelier the face. This is why the angels who are in the inmost heaven are the loveliest, because they are forms of heavenly love. People who have loved divine truths more outwardly and therefore lived by them more outwardly are less lovely, since only the more outward aspects radiate from their faces, and the deeper heavenly love, which means the form of heaven as it is in its own right, does not shine through these more outward forms. All perfection increases as you move inward and lessen as you move outward in heavens. As the perfection increases or lessens, so does the beauty. And Swedenborg says, I've seen faces of angels of the third heaven, which is the inmost or highest heaven, so beautiful that no painters with all their skill could render a fraction of their light with their pigment, or rival 1,000th part of the light and life that show in their faces. The faces of angels of the outmost heaven, though, can be depicted to some extent. So the further out we go from the centre of heaven, the more we're capable of depicting what they look like. Now, various artists throughout the ages have tried to depict all sorts of faces, as in this case, Da Vinci, who used to like drawing caricatures of all manner of faces of people that he met and maybe even imagined. We don't really know if he met these people or imagined them. So in Heaven and Hell, he says, Swedenborg says, all perfection increases as you move inward and lessen as you move outwards. Oh, we said that before already. Love for oneself and love for of the world are diabolical, and people who are absorbed in them look frightful. So this is a case in Heaven and Hell 555 where Swedenborg actually becomes curious. He didn't quite understand immediately why he had encountered such frightful appearances of people in the hells. And he wanted to know more, and the angels showed him and told him that love for oneself, love for the outer world are diabolic, and people who are absorbed in them look frightful. Of course, there are some conditions attached to that, so the primary love can override that. You can have a love for say, exercising a certain amount of control in the world for the sake of the betterment of the conditions of people. And that love for control, for example, which is considered usually an outer love if that's all you love, if you just want the control for the sake of self, that would be a hellish form of love. But if it's love for the sake of uses and for the sake of goodness, then that's a different question altogether. So for various cities around the world, they continue this exercise. And as I said, this is Sydney's result. Now, this actually, for me, is quite a heavenly picture in some way. And I'll read a quote to you that makes you perhaps understand where I'm coming from. So in Heaven and Hell, number 47, Swedenborg says that all individuals of a particular angelic community have a facial resemblance, yet differ in detail. Just as in our world, every race has a general similarity about the face and eyes that enable us to recognize it and distinguish it from others. This is even more true in families, but is even more perfectly true in the heavens, because there all the deeper feelings are visible and shine forth from the face. The face there is the outward and graphic form of their deeper feelings. It's not possible in heaven to have a face that differs from our feelings. So dissimulation doesn't happen in heaven. You could even almost say it's not allowed in heaven, or in fact, you wouldn't be in heaven if you practiced dissimulation. But the point that really struck me was that the angels have a certain facial similarity to the communities in which they live, and there's also a representative face that is seen when that community speaks as a whole. So I've got a quote about that here. So this is Heaven and Hell 47 continued. And Swedenborg says, I was shown how this general similarity is varied in detail in the individuals of a single celestial community. There was a kind of angelic face that appeared to me, and this was varied according to the qualities of affections that were characteristic of the individuals in a particular community. These variations lasted quite a while, and through it all, I noticed that the same general face remained constant as a basis, with everything else being simply derivations and elaborations from it. I was also shown how this general likeness is varied in particulars with the individuals of one society. The face of angels are the deeper qualities taking form. Their faces are forms of their affections of love and faith. So to me, this project that these technologists are engaging in, and psychologists, actually represents something heavenly, something spiritual. Because they've done a lot of research with these composite pictures, these averaged pictures on the left and right, which are the summation, if you like, or the averaging, the combination of all of the pictures in the middle. And when they put these averaged pictures just willy-nilly amongst the individual faces that were the source of that material, and they asked people to rate which one do you find more beautiful, the individual face. They don't say that, they say the face on the left or the face on the right. The people will always pick the average face. So the average face actually has a greater beauty for most people. In fact, I'd say nearly all people. There may be some exceptions, but the research says all people find the averaged face is more beautiful, which is quite a profound psychological outcome. This is from the city of Pamplona. This one is from Cologne in Germany. You can see that there's a slightly different nationalistic representation there, isn't there? You know, if you compare Sydney, where's Sydney? Sydney. The features of the faces are somewhat different. They vary slightly. And this goes on for all different, you know, I'm not going to show you the whole lot. There's quite a few of these. Florence. Now they've done the same thing with people like country composites. So they've taken the faces of women from various countries, for example. They've done the same with men, of course, but I can only show you one at the time. So I've got another quote here from Heaven and Hell, number 70, where Swedenborg says, all individuals in a community of heaven look like a single individual when they are all together. Yet one community is not the same person as any other. They are differentiated like the faces of individuals. The reason is that they differ depending on the various good activities they participate in, as that gives them their form. Those communities that are in the central or highest heaven and are at its centre appear in the most perfect and lovely human form. Here's an example of a composite from male celebrities. And they have done male averaging across a whole lot of different countries in Europe, for example, and even put them on a map. So if a woman wants to know which is the best country to move to find the sexiest man or the best looking man, then here's your map. So people have mapped faces in other ways as well, as in this case here, mapping the pimples on your face, what organ of the body they relate to. But there's a dermatologist, a reputable dermatologist, Dr. Hussein, who says that the research isn't quite robust and there is a lack of controlled studies to show that it's accurate. So an acne face map is not a helpful way to pinpoint the cause of your breakouts. Other types of face mapping, face recognition, of course, which is very prevalent today. But we do face mapping ourselves as well in our mind. So the way our mind has been designed, it uses the brain in a very efficient way so that when we look at a plant, there are certain neural networks, connections between neurons in our brain that recognise that these are the features of a plant, and it tries to sort of limit it to a very few number of connections so that we can very quickly figure out what it is. We do the same with faces. We look at a face and there are a certain number of connections. Apparently 8 is enough. 8 connective networks is enough to detect that it is a face. So we look at things like features on the face, like how far are the eyes apart? Where is the mouth located? How long is the nose from the eyebrows to the tip of the nose? How are these related to each other? And then that forms altogether that facial schema, they call it, which helps us to recognise that both it is a face and also often gives us a clue as to whose face it is. So when we're looking at faces, we tend to look at things in terms of schemas. But of course, this is coming from a piece of research that's based on scientific interpretations of things, not the spiritual counterpart, which takes into account that our brains do what our mind wants, rather than our minds are a byproduct of insignificant waftiness that comes from our brain, which is the real structure. I don't agree with the interpretation. Anyway, there's such a thing as seeing faces in all sorts of things, and that's called Paradolia. And for me, it's actually, in a way, an indication that there is more to this face recognition than just our brain. I think the mind is designed, in fact, I believe our spirit is designed to dwell on faces. It's geared to faces because faces are an expression of the interior of the person, and we want to connect interiorly with things. And I think that's our drive, that's our makeup, that's our God-given orientation. And this is just a sign of it, that we see faces in even inanimate things. It's quite fun to have a quick look at some of these Paradolia examples. Of course, it's given rise to some quirky representations in films, as in Jules Verne, The Man on the Moon. There's a feature on Mars which looks very much like a face. This is called the famous Mars rock formation, or man in Mars. So our brain's face perception mechanism, which is mainly the fusiform face area, comes up with this pareidolia tendency. So it's a tendency for perception to impose a meaningful interpretation on a nebulous visual stimulus, seeing an object, pattern or meaning where there is none. So we even tend to recognise and think that there's something there when there isn't any. Here's some funny ones. Do you recognise where it is there? The rock face, literally. The cool haircut as well. Water going down the sink. It's quite amazing how clued in we are to seeing facial features in anything and everything. And then there's a thing called anthropomorphism, where we have we give things the attributes of human traits and emotions or intentions to non-human entities, like reading a motivation into an animal's behaviour. And it's also an innate tendency in human psychology. So we really are geared to seeing the whole world and everything that happens in it in some way, relating it back to the human. And of course, the human at all levels in the spiritual world is what gives things their ultimate and grand scale form, as in the grand human. which is the collection of all the societies in heaven. If you look at them from a distance, you see them as a grand human form. There's also personification, where we attribute human form and characteristics to abstract concepts, not living things, such as nations, natural forces perhaps, seasons, the weather, El Nino, what's El Nino? Is that, who's a Spanish speaker here? Does that mean the girl or the boy or the child? Anyway, we give these. John Bull, Uncle Sam, attributing human form and characteristics to nations. There was the famous case of seeing the Virgin Mary in the sandwich, a cheese sandwich, which was bought by a casino for $28,000. A grilled cheese sandwich in 2004. Made a good bit of money. Now they're taking advantage of it by creating toasters, which can actually, virtually put anything on your toast you want. I think it's not a bad idea, really. Or you can take selfies and put that on your toast if you want, if you're that way inclined. So maybe the way the toast comes out and what's on it might give you a clue as to which of the four loves you manifest.
If I put a cow on the toast, will it be meat-flavored toast?
Only if you smear it with Vegemite. And there was a Japanese company which became famous because they served coffee, and on the froth of the cappuccino they could put your face. So they would take a selfie of the person and they put that on the coffee, which is quite a cool little stunt, coffee printer really. And of course, we all know about cake printing, that you can print icing sheets from any photo you like and put it on a cake these days. We've come a long way since the times of the most ancient church, haven't we? Surely. So anthropomorphizing stuff is where, we attribute human traits. It's common for people to see non-existing features. I already read that. Yeah. This kind of stuff, It's also been the subject of various depictions in art. Dogs playing cards. Now there's an app called Google and Arts Culture. And this app, if you get this app, you can take a selfie, a photo of yourself. And for those older people who don't understand what that is, a photo of yourself, and it captures that in the app, and it will go looking through the art of the world to find those pieces of art which have the same facial features as yourself. So you can figure out whether you look like Vincent van Gogh or Rembrandt or, Rubens or whoever. So we're pretty much a composition of various different features. Now, what about our face recognition? Sometimes we don't quite get it right. This is George Bush and Dick Cheney. But what people often don't see is that actually it's not Dick Cheney. It's George Bush and George Bush. So if you look closely, the features of George Bush have been put on Dick Cheney's face. But a lot of people don't recognise that. So we tend to interpret face features in terms of their context rather than absolutely. There's no sort of absolute recognition of a face in any way. What about this one? You recognise who that is? That's actually two faces. It looks to me a bit like Sean Connery, but actually it's George Clooney's top half and Harrison Ford's bottom half. So when you put them together, you get a George Ford or a Harrison Clooney. Now, there's some famous faces that are very recognisable, and if they're put upside down, you can see that these are the same face. except if we turn them over, you can see that they're not quite the same, are they? I don't know if you saw that. Because we're seeing it upside down, we're not seeing it in context the way we normally judge faces and evaluate them. And so we don't see that it's been messed with on the left. Some people are much better at recognizing faces than others and remembering faces. So just as some people are more capable of seeing certain colors, more detailed colors than others. And you can do this face memory test for free if you want, and figure out whether you're any good at recognizing and remembering faces. There are people who spend their whole life's work on faces, such as this person. She's a face identifier, otherwise known as a forensic anthropologist specializing in facial anatomy. So if there's a crime scene and somebody has committed a crime and they've got some footage of that person, including parts of their face, she will be able to help determine whether that really was that person or not, or whether they just look like them. And we might take into account 8 facial factors, but she takes into account quite a lot. Like, she will look at not just where's the nose, how long's the nose, but she'll look at how big is the round dot at the end, the point at the end, what's the angle of the nose, where does it lift at the bottom, all that kind of stuff. But we usually, normal people, can base face recognition on about 8 facial measurements, which is quite amazing considering that if you combine all of those effects, there's about 1 in a trillion chance of recognizing the same face if you mix up all those 8 facial measurements. That's quite amazing. And considering there are nearly 8 billion people on the planet, that means everybody's got a different face. And it goes on infinitely, according to Swedenborg. I think he makes this point somewhere or other, I think, or at least somebody does, that in all through history, everybody's got a different face to each other. We're unique in our face, and because it expresses a unique person with a unique function and unique features, unique combination of things. But it's not just our faces. We know our fingerprints are unique as well. And the chances of overlapping fingerprints with someone else is very, very rare, which is what makes it a good recognition system. But this is also true for simpler things like the ear. It turns out the ear isn't quite as similar to other people's ears as we think, And when you really study it in detail, as these expert facial anatomists do, we begin to realise that actually, yes, there are some details that are always unique to a person. And this enables them to detect who the individual might have been that robbed the bank if they're wearing their balaclava behind their ear rather than over their ear, as in this case. How am I doing for time, Todd? Because I've got, I can stretch or shrink what's left.
I mean, we're about the hour mark, so I'd say start wrapping it up. Okay.
What I'll do is just a couple of things. Now, if we try to use the face to figure out what a person's feeling, what would you say this person's feeling? My gut feel at first impression is he's annoyed about something, right? But actually, it turns out that they just scored a goal, and so the face doesn't tell you everything. You need to observe gestures as well, ethnicity, colour. There's a lot of things that come into it. This is an ecstatic elation. Yes, we've won. The face is quite a plastic thing, as you can tell from this photo of Mariano Filiani. He's a Belgian from Moroccan origin.
Einstein. Wasn't that Einstein?
This one hasn't been messed with, except by the ball. He now plays for China, by the way. Okay, let me see. Jesus says, know what's in front of your face, and what is hidden from you will be disclosed to you. For there is nothing hidden that will not be revealed. Let's see, what else can I say about faces? That's a little bit, that's quite a lot there, but essentially what this is trying to describe is that there is a layout to heaven, to the next world, and that after death we are what we love or intend. So Swedenborg tells us. Heaven is spread out in communities based on different qualities of love, and every spirit comes into the heaven and community that matches their love, where we feel in our element, at home, back to our birthplace. So this is true for everybody, no matter where they end up. They will feel at home, at ease, in our element, back in our birthplace. So there's an axis of love and concern for others and for the divine, and there is an axis to do with wisdom, whether we're wise or ignorant, or whether we're selfish or selfless. That's essentially sums it up. But Swedenborg says that peculiarly, depending on the way we're facing, or rather, we are turned in a direction which represents our inner love, our chief love. So a person who looks towards the Lord and towards the neighbour will have obviously a more beautiful expression than someone who looks towards themselves and the world. And this, no, I won't go into that now. I'll skip that part. Anyway, so almost there. The left eye is the understanding part of the mind, whereas the right eye is the affection. And I'm going to skip over a whole lot of psychology here to this part. But our ruling love is our real inner face. It is the animal within. Dr. Groves gave a quote in one of his pieces of writings that said, face and accept that in ourselves we have all that we have projected onto other people. Although it's hard to do, it will bring us face to face with our chief feature very quickly, or our ruling love. If we face it courageously, we can overcome it. So that's the end.
A fitting picture.
It just fits, only just. I'm glad he's not coming towards us.
Yeah, right. Well, at this point, does anybody want to have anything to say? I mean, if anybody wants to unmute themselves and have a comment, that this is the time to grill Joe. Get him just like you grill me. No mercy.
What do you want on the grill, by the way?
No, sort of.
Well, I enjoyed all that, all those Swedenborg portraits, and I enjoyed I really enjoyed the turning portraits of old people. I should say old. Ancient people. A few years ago. Face on the street. That was really interesting. It's always interesting for me because I feel like I do judge a lot on somebody's face, and a kind of vibe that I pick up from them. And I generally am the person who says, yes, you can judge a book by its cover. But I know it's not true. But I still do it.
Yeah, we're wrong very often, aren't we? But often it's a projection of what we see first are the things that dwell in us most readily, which is why facing that which we see in others in terms of looking back at ourselves with that in mind is a very useful approach. It's self-study.
I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh,
Yep.
Yeah.
I was struck by how the composite faces of the male and the female were very similar, like brother and sister, or
Yeah.
Yep.
I was really struck by that.
Yeah, as Swedenborg said, that you see recognition in families, traits in family features, and it's no different in the next world.
Yeah, I love like walking through a shopping centre and seeing mothers and daughters, or sisters, obviously sisters, going for a walk together and seeing the similarities. I find it fascinating.
Mm.
Thinking of those composite images too, I was saying to Todd that I thought it was interesting that the composite images were quite attractive, and that I didn't feel like there was much room for there to be more attractive people, but there'd be a lot of room for there to be less attractive people. So how are those average if they're so high, Weird.
Well, actually, that's a good point, that in a way, where we start out in life, we have tendencies towards all sorts of selfishness, evils, we have to battle those states. We have to battle those tendencies. And so we're perfected more and more as we go on. So we become more similar to the average beauty, or we become perhaps more representative of the average beauty of the community that we engage with as we go on.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't say anything about beards, Joe.
Oh, yeah.
That would be too self-referential, Ralph. I didn't bring my shaver, so.
Never trust a guy with a beard.
Oh dear. I think you should get a second opinion.
I will say that every time I read about faces, or hear about faces, or reflect on the usefulness of faces, I wind up just being very thankful that we are not in a state where whatever is on our mind is expressed in our face.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It's a kind of a very forgiving and loving situation that's been created for us, that not everything has to make it into the world, does it? It's a kind of buffer, if you like. We can reflect on what we're inclined to want to express, but before we express it, we can put a stop to it if we wish and choose to.
I see it as both a protection and a tool for charity, or a tool of charity, in this world anyway.
And a way of learning, because you can fake it till you make it. You can, you can be feeling awful inside, but you'll do something that's not awful to try and change the way you are, and it'll work.
Yeah, well, that does seem to be the general principle in this world, because if we are able to have a nice exterior, yet our internal isn't so nice, it actually gives us an alternative to what we like on the inside, so that we can change in this world. But we don't have that option in the next world, Swedenborg tells us.
So we see the difference, you mean?
Well, when in the Gospels, we're supposed to be perfect. Usually the translation is you need to be perfect like your Father is perfect, but a better translation would be complete. So, if we can make our inside the same as our outside, when we are presenting a nice exterior, whilst, you know, our natural tendency might not be so nice. It's just to make everything consistent. So in this world, we've got that opportunity, which, you know, we don't have in the next world.
And the process begins from the inside, we are told by Swedenborg, that our inner reforms the outer, not the other way around.
Yeah, well, I think we've got a process happening where maybe one takes the lead and then the other takes the lead, and it's a kind of an interaction, a process along those lines. Probably, you know, more complex than, you know, we can actually make a simplistic kind of explanation of things. It's probably more involved than we can tend to state.
Unless somebody's got something super pressing, I'm going to say let's call it there. We've been online here for an hour and 15 now. So,
whole new meaning for the term FaceTime, right?
There's even a book about it called Facebook.
All right. Well,
lucky you didn't turn up for my humour presentation.
Yeah, actually, I have that recorded, just so you know. So,
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah,
thanks everybody for showing up.
Organizing, Todd.
Thanks for showing up. Thanks, Todd, for persevering.
Yeah, we get through it. So, yeah, we'll do it again sometime.